Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anne Klemenko, and I'm the Director of Research Services at Lakehead University. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. But first, let me welcome you all to Research and Innovation Week's 2022 Research Showcase. This year, the theme of R&I Week is Planetary Stewardship in support of the university's Year of Climate Action. We know we have a critical window of opportunity to act on climate change. The Year of Climate Action is Lakehead University's next step in taking that action. The Year of Climate Action is about rising up, regenerating, transitioning, and sustaining. The Year of Climate Action is about creating the possibility for change that is amplified when we work together. While we have declared this the Year of Climate Action, we know this year is a starting place. The Year of Climate Action is passionately being coordinated by a team of faculty, staff, and students. Many departments, organizations, and individuals have organized events, initiatives, and concrete climate actions for YOCA. Please visit lakeheadu.ca/YOCA to learn more and to see what future events are lined up. I would also like to recognize that our Thunder Bay and Orillia campuses are on the traditional lands of some of this country's Indigenous peoples. In Thunder Bay, we are on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. In Orillia, Lakehead University resides on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people and of the Rama First Nation. The Anishinaabe called the areas now known as Thunder Bay and Orillia home for thousands of years before they were settled by Europeans and continue to be active in their territory. A land acknowledgement honors and recognizes the historical and current presence of Indigenous peoples and their rights to and relationship with the land that non-Indigenous people now call home. But land acknowledgements are more than statements. They call for the ongoing recognition of the protocols and processes of local Indigenous peoples. Like other acts of reconciliation, land acknowledgements must be followed with continued and meaningful concrete actions. Indigenous communities have led many movements for protecting ecological and human health, such as through the dedicated and difficult work of land and water defenders. We know that those least responsible for climate disruption and greenhouse gas emissions, including many Indigenous and equity-deserving groups, are the most vulnerable to its impacts. Climate change is an issue of ecological, social, and economic justice. This year's Research and Innovation Week Research Showcase features presentations by leading climate change researchers at Lakehead University and other institutions of higher education. We are honored to learn from these researchers and the innovative work they are conducting to respond to climate change. We know that change is created by the cumulation of these actions and is amplified when we share it together. With that, I'm very excited to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Semi Sama. Semi is a law professor in the Faculty of Law at Lakehead University. She holds a doctorate law from the University of Ottawa, a master's in global sustainability and environmental law from the University of Ottawa, and a master's of ecotechnology and sustainable development from Mid-Sweden University in Sweden, a master's in environmental governance from Stockholm University, and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Buea, Cameroon. Before joining Lakehead in 2020, Professor Sama was a postdoctoral scholar at the Faculty of Law at McGill University, a postdoc fellow at the Center for International Governance, Innovation in Waterloo, and a United Nations Environment Fellow. Professor Sama's research lies at the intersection of international law, environmental law, human rights law, trade and investment law, and sustainable development law. Her publications address various topics, including land grabbing, climate change, tenure security, environmental human rights, and sustainable forest management. Her most recent article focuses on strengthening the role of forests in climate change mitigation through the European Union Forest Law Enforcement, Governance and Trade Action Plan. Professor Sama is the author and co-editor of and contributor to many publications. She is actively engaged in developing Canadian and African law and policy, and she is frequently speaking at conferences and public events. She is also involved in several environment-related committees and working groups in Thunder Bay. Today's talk by Dr. Sama will highlight how climate change education is a fundamental human right and a key to a sustainable future. She will showcase how her teaching and research at the law school supports Lakehead University's Year of Climate Action. Over to you, Semi.
Thank you so much, Anne, for the introduction. So I am going to start sharing. Okay, from the beginning. Yes, thank you once again. So I am an environmental educator. I help learners understand environmental issues and take urgent actions to combat them. So like she mentioned, today I am going to show you how my work at the Bora Laskin Faculty of Law is activating communities of future environmental activists and leaders. And here is how I am going to do it. First, I'll provide you with a brief background to the theme of this year's Research and Innovation Week. Next, I'll explain why we should care about the planet and take urgent action against climate change and its impact. Moreover, I'll introduce you to the global call for climate change education, including its significance and barriers. Furthermore, I will illustrate how I am promoting climate change education at the Law School of Lakehead University. I'll conclude my presentation with a few recommendations. You probably already know that universities have pledged to combat climate change. But did you know that research says there is no solution to the climate crisis without climate change education? Climate change education is key to addressing climate change. Universities and colleges train the scientists, politicians, and individuals who are at the center of global climate change efforts. Yet, most universities continue to generate huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions due to student, faculty, and staff mobility and excessive consumption of energy and water. It was against the backdrop of such concerns that universities started committing to promote sustainable development. At COP26 in Glasgow, it was announced that over 1,000 universities have pledged to halve their emissions of greenhouse gases by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. To achieve its goal to become more environmentally friendly, Lakehead University announced it is divesting its endowment of fossil fuel stocks. Lakehead University also declared this year the Year of Climate Action. So the Year of Climate Action is a call to action for faculty, administration, students and staff, and the larger community to collectively join together to listen, to learn, to share, and most importantly, to act on climate change. In support of the YOCA, Lakehead University announced the theme for this year's Research and Innovation Week, Planetary Stewardship. Why should we care about addressing climate change? Why should we care about making informed decisions or take collective actions to protect our climate? These are valid questions, and here is my response. In 2018, the IPCC published a special report on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The report assesses projected impacts at a global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius and projected impacts at a global warming of 2 degrees Celsius. According to the report, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius could reduce the number of people vulnerable to extreme weather events, including poverty and food insecurity. You probably have noticed the increase in the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. If you haven't noticed, the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events has increased in Canada and other parts of the world. In 2021, the government of Canada, precisely Environment and Climate Change Canada, released a report of top 10 weather stories for 2021. Canada is the second coldest country in the world, yet a few days into summer 2020, temperature went up to 50 degrees in British Columbia, precisely in the village of Lytton. Consequently, 90% of this village was burnt to the ground. British Columbia also experienced floods in 2021. Roads were flooded, a train was washed out, barns were surrounded with flood waters. Last year, the Canadian Drought Monitor classified 90% of the prairie agricultural landscape as a drought scene. Crops were scorched and stunted as they withered under the blanketing dry heat. Veteran farmers in that part of the country did not hesitate to describe the drought as the worst in history. Across Canada, the wildfire season started a month earlier, and nationally, the number of fires were 2,500 more in 2021 than in 2020. According to the government of Canada, on July 10th, fires were out of control in Canada. Almost every region of Canada experienced forest fires except Nunavut and Atlantic Canada. In Ontario, over 3,000 people were evacuated from their communities. In 2021, terrible tornadoes struck Canada, and it destroyed houses and property in Barrie in the province of Ontario. Climate change has had an incredibly disastrous environmental impact throughout the world. Small island nations, including Kiribati, are threatened by rising sea level. Climate change, ladies and gentlemen, has a ripple effect. Climate change is expanding deserts in dryland regions, and that is impacting agricultural land, reducing agricultural lands, impacting agricultural yields, promoting food insecurity, and encouraging poverty. Climate change is creating environmental refugees in almost every part of the world, as millions of people are being pushed out of their homes, pushed out of their farms and communities by forest fires, desertification, soil degradation, tornadoes, among many other extreme weather events. Such ripple effects make it an uphill battle for us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted in 2015. These goals were adopted with the purpose of ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring peace and prosperity around the world by 2030. We should care about climate change because it is economically unsustainable. It is affecting our economies, both global and national. This is a picture, a publication by the Insurance Bureau of Canada. The Insurance Bureau says that the insured damage for severe weather events across Canada reached $2.1 billion in 2021. Our health systems, our food systems, economies, and communities are all at enormous risk. According to this study conducted by CTV News, climate change could cost the world economy $7.9 trillion by 2050 due to increased drought, floods, and crop failures. Climate change could cost Canada up to $43 billion per year by 2050. Perhaps you've thought about the economic and social impacts of climate change, but what about the causes of extreme weather events? What is your knowledge and understanding of climate change? We used to think of climate change as a problem looming in our future, but we know now and with certainty that climate change is here. The sad news is climate change is here to stay. Why? Climate change is caused by the emission of greenhouse gases such as methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, ozone, among others. Some of these gases are known as long-lived climate pollutants. Others are short-lived climate pollutants. Carbon dioxide in particular is a long-lived climate pollutant. Once carbon dioxide is emitted, that is, once it is released to the atmosphere, it hangs around for a long time, up to a century. So the carbon dioxide we emit today will endure on the time scale of many human lives. We all need to be empowered to be part of the climate change problems. According to a study, according to the UNESCO Director General, climate change is no longer the threat of a distant future. It is a global reality, and there is no solution to climate change without climate change education. Every learner needs to understand climate change, the causes and the consequences of climate change. We all need to be empowered to be part of the solution, and every teacher, educators must be given the opportunities to teach about climate change, and institutions and states must mobilize for this. After the publication of IPCC's report last month, here is what the UN Secretary General had to say. Every fraction of a degree matters. Every voice, including yours, can make a difference, and every second counts. So you should, or we should, take action on climate change because it is economically, environmentally, and socially unsustainable. It is undermining opportunities for future generations to meet their basic needs. What is climate change education? Climate change education is a branch of education, and education is a fundamental human right. It is a right inherent to every human being, irrespective of how we look or how we speak, what we have. It is a right inherent to everyone, irrespective of what our geographical location is. And the right to climate change education is enshrined in a number of international agreements, such as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. In particular, Article 6 focuses on climate change education. This agreement aims to stabilize greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that will prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. The second agreement is the Paris Agreement. In particular, Article 12 focuses on climate change education. The Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015 to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change. Climate change education is also recognized as an integral element of Sustainable Development Goal 4 on quality education and Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action. According to these agreements, education for climate change empowers learners of all ages with the knowledge, the skills, the values, and the attitudes to address climate change and its impacts. In summary, climate change education is an opportunity for us to understand the causes and consequences of climate change, in addition to understanding the strategies to addressing climate change. If we understand that climate change is caused by emissions of greenhouse gases, then we can start enacting laws to prevent the release of these gases. If we understand that forest is a carbon sink, then we can start enacting laws to prohibit deforestation and promote sustainable forest management. Next, climate change education is a passport to a sustainable future. And that passport belongs to those who are ready to be educated on climate change. Climate change education can improve the lives of millions of people all around the world. Some have started recognizing the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of cost of climate-friendly technologies. Some of those technologies are more flexible, less expensive, and more efficient. It is a reasonable conclusion that climate change education is a powerful weapon which one can use to change the lives of present and future generations and to promote intergenerational and intragenerational equity. Climate literacy is changing the world. Therefore, the future belongs to people with an education and an imagination to create green technologies, including solar panels, among others. What are some of the challenges to climate change education? So UNESCO conducted a study in 2021 on climate change education. And UNESCO is the leading UN education agency. So when research participants were asked about the challenges of teaching climate change, the 30% of the participants reported that they were not familiar with appropriate pedagogies. About 15,000 of those interviewed felt some approaches to teaching climate change were not suited to online teaching. This is of particular concern, given that there are millions of students who are still being affected by partial or full school closures. UNESCO concluded in that study that only half of the national curricula have a reference to climate change. This next part of my presentation is to showcase how I have been promoting climate change education at and from the Bora Laskin Faculty of Law at Lakehead University. So as an assistant professor, these are some of my duties and responsibilities: presentations, teachings, research, and service. So presentations would include preparing special lectures and presentations for conferences of this nature. So that is partly why I am here. I also teach, and the curriculum at the Bora Laskin Faculty of Law is aimed at integrating legal skills with substantive legal knowledge. And our 3-year law degree focuses on 3 mandates. Natural resources and environmental law is one of the 3 mandates. And this is a list of my teaching assignments for the last year and this academic year. The question is, how do I teach? How do I teach? So I use role play in my teaching. So role play is an interactive classroom activity that I use in my teachings. And according to researchers, role play is a social activity in which participants take on and act out roles within a predefined social framework. So I make my students take the roles of all the perspectives of policymakers, of scientists, of NGOs, among others, and they must interact from these perspectives. Environmental dispute resolution play was a role play that I ran in the fall of 2020 and the fall of 2021. So students were divided into a number of teams, and each team was comprised of a moderator, students advocating for international environmental law, and those advocating for national sovereignty. And students were asked to argue the positions by participation in a 30-minute television interview style. So the students were presented with, among others, global environmental problems, including transboundary water pollution and climate change. And they were expected to read an assigned handout containing information significant to solving the problem. Each presentation was followed by a 5-minute class discussion. The World's Future Role Play is another role play that started yesterday and ended this morning. And it was equally interactive. It was designed to teach students new ways to learn about and take action for sustainability. And the students actually played the role of different government ministers from 3 different countries. The students also had to make decisions and also make compromises, especially with regards to balancing different interests. Since sustainable development has 3 facets, they had to balance environmental concerns, economic concerns, and also social concerns. So the main objective of this role play was actually to enhance the students' skills for sustainable development, which has been defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So this role play actually enhanced their skills to make decisions in complex contexts. The sustainable development goals are complex. They are 17 in numbers with 169 targets. So it also enhanced their skills to review, present, and critically evaluate qualitative and quantitative information. Finally, it enhanced their skills to communicate information, arguments, and analysis accurately and reliably to a range of audiences. A sustainability coordinator from the Office of Sustainability here at Lakehead University was invited to moderate the simulation, and I'm very, very grateful to her for this job. The third role play is COP27. So COP27 is going to be our last role play for the semester. COP27 actually is the 27th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. COP27, or the COP, is the supreme decision-making body of the climate change regime. And the COP is comprised of policymakers, so head of states, head of governments. They meet annually to assess the implementation of the climate change agreements. So COP27 will meet in Egypt from the 6th to the 17th of November 2022 in an effort to mitigate climate change. My students are going to simulate the meeting in Egypt. So my students are going to role play COP27. The negotiation simulation is played with 5 roles. So there will be a COP27 presidency, the one that will act as chair of the meeting. And we have 4 negotiating blocks. These are the 4 negotiating blocks. And there will be, in preparation for this role play, each negotiating block has to prepare 2 documents, a background paper and a draft resolution. So the simulation will follow these 5 steps. First, each negotiating block will research assigned topics, countries, and committees. Next, they will make speeches to explain their country or region's position and the policy. Third, they are going to meet with one another to start the negotiation process. Fourth, they will each have to write out the problems they want to solve and their proposed solutions. Finally, they will have to vote on their resolutions. So in sum, this COP27 role play is a learning technique. It's a learning technique where students get to understand the main actors shaping the dynamics of global environmental governance. Students will have the opportunity to learn about the main pillars of the climate change regime, that is the policy pillar and the scientific pillar, and it will equally be an opportunity for them to play with international environmental law norms. At the end of the role play, they are expected to provide a feedback, including what their biggest challenge was, what they learned from this experience, among others. So in my teaching, I also include, I've always offered paper option in most of my courses. So my students are expected to write a term paper that has a value of at least 50% toward the final grade in a course. And through the paper option, I have had the privilege to support students to develop a strong personal connection to climate change and also a sense of agency and empowerment. And among the over 50 term papers that I have supervised, at least 30 of these papers focus on environment, climate change, or sustainability related research. And some of my former students are currently pursuing masters in environmental law in other institutions in Canada, while others are working with other institutions advocating for environmental protection. And so besides these activities, I'm also involved in research projects, currently a research project on environment and human rights in Africa, a book. And also have been working on a number of papers. You had my latest publication on the role of forests in climate change mitigation and adaptation. And also I serve in a couple of committees at the law school and the university in general. So once again, YOCA is a call to action for students, for staff, for faculty, and the larger community to collectively join together to learn, to listen, to share, and most importantly, to act on climate change. The theme is planetary stewardship. Here are some of the ways that we as individuals can promote planetary stewardship. First, you can support an environmental NGO in your community, in your province, in your country. We can also support by donating. Big or small can make a huge difference. We can also encourage reuse, reduce, and recycling of materials or products. We can recycle papers, glass, plastics, metals, and our electronics that are out of use. We can also reduce waste and emissions by composting food scraps, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions and promoting nutrient recycling. We can choose reusable products. We can buy from shops selling reusable items, Value Village, among others. We can reduce our plastic waste by using reusable water bottles and cups, and we can avoid printing or substitute printing with electronic devices. We can also reduce emissions by walking, biking, or taking public transit or transport if possible. We can become a vegetarian for 1 day or 1 week. Why? Because meat production is associated with greenhouse gases, especially methane. We can promote environmental democracy, that is access to information, participate in environmental decision-making, and access justice when these rights are being violated. These are the 3 rights that constitute the procedural dimension of the human right to a healthy environment. So once again, the aim of this presentation was to show you how my work at the law school is promoting climate change education and activating communities of future environmental leaders. So first, I introduce you to the theme for this year's Research and Innovation Week. Next, I explain why we should participate in climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. I also discuss the global call for climate change education, the significance and the possible barriers. I then went on to showcase how I am promoting climate change education at the law school. I ended my presentation with a few recommendations. Thank you. I'll take your questions.
Thank you so much, Semi, for a great presentation. I really appreciated all of your insights, as well as some of the practical strategies that we can engage in every day to combat climate change. So we have about 10 minutes left for our Q&A session. So just a reminder for the audience to use your chat function, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can in the remaining 10 minutes that we have. But let me start us off by asking you the first question, Semi. What do you believe is the primary barrier to climate change education for future law school students of the Bora Laskin Faculty of Law?
That's a brilliant question to get one thinking. So like I mentioned before, our 3-year law degree focuses on 3 mandates. So we have natural resources and environmental law, we have Aboriginal and Indigenous law, and we also have small town practice with the IPC, And we have over 15 mandatory courses offered in the Faculty of Law. However, natural resources law, environmental law in Canada, and international environmental law are not among the mandatory courses. They are optional, meaning they are not specifically required for the degree in our law school. So to me, international environmental law or environmental law in Canada should be mandatory. It should become a core course that students must study to meet the requirements of our program. So I think that's the very first. We need a seminar course that will examine climate change from a practice-based perspective. I think that too is necessary. And also this faculty needs a center. The faculty needs a research center that can promote policy-based research. I think that those are some of the ways that we can help to equip future students of this faculty, especially with regards to climate change education.
Thank you, Semi. And I see Paul has a comment and a question. So Paul says, thanks for your talk, Semi. It's great to know that things are happening at the law school. Your calls to action are mostly based on personal rather than collective actions. Are you also encouraging people to work collectively to push politicians to make the big systemic changes that we desperately need?
Oh yeah, that's very true. I wanted to start with us at our individual levels, and definitely we do need the politicians, we need the provincial and the federal government. The government of Canada is a party to the Paris Agreement and has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the Paris Agreement has the Article 12, which focuses on climate change education, meaning it's the responsibility of the federal and provincial government to put in place the policies needed to make sure that climate change education become a part of our curriculum. it is their responsibility to ensure that we have curriculum reform in Canada, not just at the Bora Laskin Faculty of Law, but also in Canada to mainstream climate change education. Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Semi.
You're welcome.
So let me take a look. Do we have any other questions from the audience? From Monica, comment, great point, Semi. I agree that we need to make environmental issues more central in every discipline. What do you think some of the most successful uses of law have been in terms of addressing environmental issues?
Environmental laws are very crucial. Laws have been put in place. We have federal legislation, we have provincial legislation, which have been put in place to regulate different aspects of the environment. We have laws regulating the air, laws regulating water, laws regulating the extraction of natural resources. And these laws have outlined principles. For instance, we have environmental impact assessment laws, which have been enacted to ensure that proposed developments, the impacts, the future impacts of proposed developments are assessed beforehand, before they even happen. So decision makers can now decide based on the assessments whether or not to approve a project. So environmental laws have played a huge role in environmental protection in this country and other parts of the world. Laws have been put in place to promote sustainable forest management. Laws have been put in place to regulate marine biodiversity. We have so many laws, natural resources extraction. We have laws have been put in place to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Semi.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for one last question. Okay, let me ask you the last question then. So Semi, what would your message be to the government of Canada about promoting climate change education?
Thank you. Another great question, Anne. Like I mentioned before, the government of Canada has committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030. That is below their 2005 level. And so the government of Canada is a party to the Paris Agreement, a party to the UNFCCC, among others. And these agreements contain important principles of international environmental law, including the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, which implies that countries do have joint responsibility. Every country has a responsibility to combat climate change, but the responsibilities are differentiated. Canada and other developed countries have agreed to mobilize at least $10 billion per year to support developing countries to combat climate change. So the government of Canada will need to help to mobilize this fund. And also Canada, in addition to every member state of the UN, they agreed and adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And at the center of that agenda is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 targets. And the goals focus, or the agenda focuses on the commitment to leave no one behind by 2030, meaning it's a collective goal. The government of Canada is doing an amazing job. The Canadian government is committed to strengthen education in many developing countries. But I think the global progress has been slow. Something is missing in the sense that there are communities, especially in some West African countries, that are lagging behind. They need the support of the Canadian government. in addition to other the industrialized countries, they need that support. And take, for instance, scholarship opportunities. They mostly focus on Eastern African countries or a few Central African countries. You realize that most of those scholarships, students from Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, and a few other West African countries do not benefit from those support. So we need the government of Canada to try to ensure that other vulnerable communities also benefit from their support. And I'll just conclude by saying that the Sustainable Development Goals, again, they are global goals, and they need to be achieved everywhere. So when the Honorable Marie-Claude Bibeau was the Minister of International Development and La Francophonie, she said that the Sustainable Development Goals will not be said to have been achieved unless they are achieved for everyone and everywhere. Meaning, if they are not achieved in Cameroon, they are not achieved at all. So the government of Canada once again need to ensure that their international development assistance also reach the most vulnerable, and they should try to mobilize the $10 billion per year that they promised developing countries, so that by 2030 we will be able to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Well said. Thank you, Semi. It appears we've come to the end of our time today. I just wanted to say thank you again. It's been a pleasure to have you as part of our research showcase.